Yeah, so after completing the recovery of the crew of Turbine 33, we were still unaware of where the four-man Navy SEAL reconnaissance team was. And, coming into the mission, we didn't really know what happened to those guys. So after the helicopter recovery, we were going to see if we assumed they were there, but they weren't. So our next job was to figure out where they were. And we had about 3 or 4 hours left of daylight. Our job then was, okay, well, let's go find those guys.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Tony Brooks, a former Army Ranger with 2nd Ranger Battalion who fought in Afghanistan early in the war and in Ramadi, Iraq. Tony's first mission was significant, being tasked with the recovery of downed Chinook helicopter Turbine 33 and the lone survivor Marcus Luttrell in the mountains of Afghanistan. His book, Leave No Man Behind, is all about this experience as the primary search and rescue element that catalogues the mission from hitting the ground, recovering the bodies, and hunting for every last man to bring them home. In this episode, we also touch on the impact of a legendary man, soldier, ranger, and American, Pat Tillman, who had a tremendous influence on Tony and myself for that matter. I hope you enjoy his combat story and the mission to bring everyone home as much as I did. Tony, thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So I was mentioned just before we hit record here that I wanted to start off with a question that I was really surprised I have not talked to anybody about in 40 interviews. And your book, Leave No Man Behind, as you can see behind your shoulder there, brought this up. And I thought it'd be a great way to kick off and really dig into your path to the military. And it's Pat Tillman, right, who had a huge influence on me. I just really remember him and what an iconic figure he was. But you really dive in to what he meant for you. And I just wanted to spend a couple minutes of who's Pat Tillman, and then what did he mean to you as you were kind of starting this path?
Yeah, Pat was, I think a lot of people would agree with me when I say this. He was a little bit larger than life. He was this celebrity, this amazing football player, and a guy that took a stand and said, all this that I have isn't what I want. It's not what I want for my country. It's not what I want for my life. I'm not doing enough. And to me, that was something that, I had never experienced in my life. But at that moment, when I saw him, stepping up to the plate, it kind of made me really question what I was doing with my life and knowing that I could do more. So I'd say he was a huge inspiration to many of us, you included,
yep,
to do something more for others and not necessarily for yourself. And, I can't say enough good things about the guy. I mean, he basically guided me to 2nd Ranger Battalion.
And I would not be surprised if there are folks listening to this who don't know who he is. And I think I take it for granted just because of our age, maybe, and when we grew up. But the guy was a college football star, a pro athlete. He just was larger than life, as you said, and he walked away from all of it after 9/11 to go and serve, and tragically, right, was killed in action. And there was just something about him saying, "Hey, I'm giving all this up, and I'm going to go serve," that meant a lot, I think, to tons of us.
Yeah, I mean, he walked away from a contract that was on the table for him to stay, and I think that says a lot too.
It does. Damn. All right, so I know sports were a big part of your life. I want to kind of dial it back to as you're growing up. Where did you start getting the military itch in your childhood?
Yeah, that's actually a good question, because as I was writing my book, I was trying to figure that out myself. I think it was my brother. My brother growing up was a huge military buff. He was that kid that would sit in his room and watch the History Channel when the rest of us were watching MTV. And he would tell me all these stories about these, battles in Vietnam and World War II and even World War I. And, I wasn't interested at all. I would just listen and, yeah, that's cool, bro. Thanks for telling me. But he would always, always, always tell me that, someday I'm going to be an Army Ranger because, they're the best. And I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, oh, they seem like they're pretty badass. So that was probably the initial kind of inkling of joining the military, but I never thought it was for me. I thought that was just for my brother and for other people. It wasn't until 9/11 that really kicked me into gear. That changed everything, right? 9/11 happened, and I knew I needed to do more. Like being in college wasn't my path at that point. Didn't feel right. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't even care. I mean, I was mostly partying and living a life of a failed college student. So I finally had a purpose with 9/11. So that's kind of where I was birthed into the military community, at least.
So did your brother end up serving?
He actually, after I enlisted and I had just finished basic training, he was just starting. And he got to I think it was his last week or the second to last week of basic training or infantry school. And the whole group was being told to do some push-ups. And so he dropped down like a good recruit would, and his shoulder completely exploded. He just had it surgically repaired a year before, and he tested out as it was a good surgery and it was healed and it's going to be fine. He was a very strong guy, much stronger than myself. And the shoulder just gave out. It was just a failed surgery. And the military basically looked at him and said, yeah, you're damaged goods. If you're starting your career off like this, we don't want you. So he went through everything, all the field training exercises, everything. He was just waiting for graduation at that point. And he lost it because his shoulder just was destroyed. Oh, pretty sad. Yeah. And that was his life stream. So I think part of me in my journey kind of always held on to that, knowing that my brother really wanted this. So I think it helped motivate me to move me through all the training. And so I thank him for that, because, you need anything sometimes to get through some of that training. You just got to dig deep and try to find something to grasp onto to keep you going.
And actually in the book, and I know we'll get to it, but as you go through this mission, to rescue the lone survivor and recover these bodies, you're really pushed into this world of like, you don't have a ton of water, you're running out of food, you're on the run, like you're not sleeping. And it sounded a lot like Ranger School, like the way that they designed Ranger School. And I think it's easy to look at maybe the urban fighting that took place years after you left, and it didn't quite mimic that Ranger School experience. But man, as I was listening to yours, I was like, this could just be, you could be on a patrol somewhere at Ranger School, and this is what they were testing you on. So, man, I was wondering, you had a serious injury in high school, is that right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did that impact? Like, first, let's talk about that, and then did that have any impact on you as you moved into obviously similar type work, putting a lot of strain on it?
I'm one of the lucky ones. That injury. So what I did is I tore my ACL, my MCL, and my medial meniscus in my right knee. And I did that, early on in high school. So I was a sophomore in high school when it happened. And, obviously the rest of my high school career was destroyed as far as sports go, because I was rehabbing, and it took me over a year to rehab it. And it was mostly 100%. I always felt like that leg never regained strength, but as time will tell, even though I questioned it all the time, it never, ever was a problem. I just always was thinking about it. It was always in the back of my head. But going through all the training, I never once worried about my knee other than, is it going to blow up? Is it going to make it? But it never really failed me.
And I mean, you are, like you're a licensed chiropractor now, you deal with the human body. Would you have anticipated somebody in that state to be able to make it through that type of training and then combat experience without having some other issue with the leg?
To be perfectly honest, with just the knowledge of science and training that I've had, I would tell you no.
Yeah.
But through my own experience, I know that the human body is
out.
much more powerful than we're trained to know. I mean, it's the stuff I see in my clinic every day. I mean, I get surprised every day. And we very much underestimate this little vehicle we're running around in.
Yeah. Oh God. Okay. So you're growing up, you make it into college for a very short stint and decide this isn't for me, but also 9/11 happens, right? So you said it kind of gave you your purpose. Can you just speak a little more to that? What did that mean to you? When you say it gave you your purpose, what was that at the time?
Yeah, I was a waffling college student. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted a college degree, and that's about it. I went through geology major because that's what my family was in. I switched to business. I went to biology and then back to business. And I really didn't have a path. I was just kind of hoping to find it by trying enough things in college. And 9/11 happening in my first year, I knew right away. I was like, my purpose is to fight for my country, is to defend my country. I love America. I love my country. I love everything that we have. I always felt like I won the lottery, living here. I would read about things all over the world, people starving, wars, crime, things that I didn't have to experience here ever. I just read about it. So I always felt like I was cheating the system, so to speak. And I think 9/11 just kind of really woke me up to the horrors of the world, and that someone's got to step up. We don't all get to just ride this awesome Disneyland ride. Some of us are going to have to do the hard work to build that ride. So, it's amazing that it takes a severe tragedy for that to occur. But in my case, that's what it was.
It's interesting. I was just watching with my boys last night. ESPN has this thing on a special about sports right after 9/11. And it's so interesting to kind of be teleported back to that environment where like everybody in the crowd is only thinking about the game. Like it's such a different feeling than where we are now. And for people who are younger and weren't there at the time, it's hard to explain. Like everybody was on the same page for once. It seemed like in this country, which is pretty cool.
I would 100% agree with that, and contrast that to right now where it's like every other person's fighting over something.
Yep.
Like I can't find any cohesion nowadays, whereas back then, gosh, everyone was on the same page.
It was awesome.
Everybody. Yeah, I miss that. I mean, I don't want another tragedy, but really, is that what it's going to take?
Right. Exactly.
I hope not.
So look, you take this path straight into the Ranger Battalion, right? Why? I think it's your brother who kind of plants the seed in your head, but why go that route? Why not go some other route in the military? Why not go in the Navy? Why the Army and why the Rangers?
I think when I was evaluating where I wanted to be in the military, I mean, obviously 9/11, my brother's planting the seed. I had Black Hawk Down came out right after 9/11, which really got my juices flowing. I'm like, those guys, what they did in Somalia, which were Rangers, was incredible. And I want to be part of that. I want to be one of those guys, the guys that everyone relies on to get us out of hell. And between, Black Hawk Down, 9/11, and then Pat Tillman comes along and becomes the Ranger, it was obvious where I needed to go. I mean, I had to. That was it. That was the only choice.
And let's just talk through that pipeline getting in, right? So you go in through basic AIT, and then are you straight out to Ranger school, or do you go straight to the battalion first?
Yeah, so you go to basic training, you do your infantry training, airborne school, then you go to Ranger indoctrination program, which for anyone who's been there will tell you, it's the ultimate suckfest. They literally try to destroy you to build you up into this, special operations beast. And I'm not the strongest guy. I'm not the fastest guy. I'm kind of a nerd. So it was more of a mindset thing than it was like, yeah, you have to be pretty strong. You have to be able to run fast and all that. But really, it was more of a mind game. Will you quit, or are you going to suck it up and just keep going through the pain? And that was it for me. I mean, I was never the front of the pack. You know, I was probably near the back of the pack or the middle of the pack. And, you know, from there, you go to your Ranger Battalion. And when you get to Ranger Battalion, you're at the mercy of the deployment cycles at the time. And when I got there, it just happened to be that my battalion was deployed. And so I got a full, what we call a training cycle in Ranger Battalion, which was a 6 months of training before deploying. Ranger school came later. In fact, I didn't even go to Ranger school until after this Afghanistan deployment that we'll get into here shortly.
So how did you feel when you rolled up? Because we're talking, correct me if I'm wrong here, Tony. Are we talking 03 right now?
2004 is when I finally shipped off. Yeah.
Okay. So things are popping off though in the war, like the wars are going 02 and then 03. And you arrive at this unit where you wanted to get to, and they're deployed and you're not going down range. How did you process that? How are you feeling about it?
I think most of us that were in battalion, we were kind of itching to get into combat. For better or worse, that was our thoughts.
Yep.
A lot of us, after we went, we changed our mind, but
yep.
At the time, we wanted in, right? We wanted in the fight. We wanted to be with the boys. And it was tough showing up knowing that, you know, they're going to be home in like 2 weeks, so you guys aren't going to go. So we knew that they were going to come home pretty feisty, and hey, you're the new guy. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking knowing that, you know, these guys are coming fresh off a deployment and to greet you.
So I believe, and I might get the timing wrong here, but just before you deploy, I believe is where you meet the unicorn. Is this correct? Hey, can we talk about the unicorn? Who plays a pivotal role in the story?
Yeah. So obviously it's my favorite part because the unicorn ends up being my wife. And so I met the unicorn, you know, like any ranger or any, you know, spec ops door kicker would at a bar. So walk into the bar, and it wasn't, you know, obviously, you know, I'm not the best looking guy. I'm not the strongest. I'm not the fastest, but I do have a pretty sharp tongue. So I use that, and I go up to the bar and I pick out the bartender as the most beautiful person in the room. Whether people agree with me or not, it doesn't matter. But to me, she was the most beautiful thing in the room. And I talked to her, and instantly I'm like, I got to get a date with this girl. I got to figure it out. So on the first day, I think I asked her out on a date, and she never said no. She looked me in the eye and said, yeah, this is very important because persistence wins, right? So really what it came down to was she never told me no. She didn't say yes. She definitely didn't say yes, but she quickly reminded me that she was taken. She had a boyfriend. I would later come to find out he was an MP. So that would kind of drive me a little bit more.
Yeah.
I love MPs, by the way. In the military, we kind of give them a hard time.
Yeah.
So I consistently would go to this bar specifically to order drinks from her. You know, obviously we're out to have a good time, but I would not order from any other bartender. If they came up to me, I would say, no, thank you. And wait.
Yeah. All right.
And it was at this place in Seattle. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Seattle, but it's called Cowgirls Inc. So it's like a Coyote Ugly style bar. So there's, you know, beautiful girls everywhere and lots of very drunk people, and it's a wild environment.
And if it's near Lewis, I would assume like it's in Seattle. So it's not kind of like outside of Benning where you actually have other people who are not military frequenting this place. That makes a difference too.
Correct. I think we may have been the only military people in the bar most of the time.
Okay. And I know you end up playing the long game, so we might end up coming back to the unicorn because I think she helps you get through this deployment. But let's talk about getting ready to ship out. And actually, one of the things I did not ask you about as you were joining up, and you can kind of pull it through to prepping for deployment. How did your family feel about you joining the service?
Yeah, my family was definitely mixed emotions there. I definitely didn't have any pushback or any encouragement. They were very neutral. And I think that was a very smart move on their part, because being a young kid, you're going to do the opposite of what your parents want. So they had to play their cards, and I think they played them right. Whereas my dad never said, don't do it, but he never said, yeah, you should do it. He just really tried to pull my motivations out of me, asking me questions, kind of questioning, getting me to question my decision to make sure I was making the right one. And ultimately, what the decision we came up with was, you need to join the military if you think it's right for you, but wait until after your first year of college. Finish that first year, then get in.
And did you make it through that first year?
I mean, technically I made it through. We won't talk about the transcripts or actually what I did, but yes, I did make it through without getting kicked out.
Got it. Okay. So you fulfilled that promise or commitment and then still found your way in. All right. So you're getting ready to deploy. What is the feeling among your teammates at the time? So you're in 2nd Ranger Battalion. It sounds like these guys just came back maybe 6 months prior, and you're getting ready to go again. I'm thinking with the same squad, like the same crew of folks who are battle tested. What was the feeling about going back for them and then for you?
In the 75th Ranger Regiment, I wouldn't call them warmongers, but I would say they're ready to fight. They're always ready to fight. They're always ready to do their job. So being the new guy with no experience, no clue what to expect, it was very motivating to see people around you that were still, motivated. They were still excited. They were still, confident. So that gave me a lot of confidence moving forward. You always look to the people around you when you're getting into something pretty hairy. And when you have those amazing leaders in front of you, it really does kind of put your worries on the back burner. So all the worries were pretty much on the back burner most of the time. And I give that to the people around me. It's pretty amazing.
Were there guys in the unit at that time who had been in Black Hawk Down? I mean, the timing's we're talking less than 10 years from that incident, or maybe right at 10 years or 11.
There were a few senior leaders that were involved, but no one directly in my chain of command. And I'm trying to remember if our chaplain, it may have been Strucker at that moment. And Chaplain Strucker was Staff Sergeant Strucker in Black Hawk Down.
Interesting.
So to me, every time I saw that guy, it was like seeing a superhero.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the reasons why I ended up in Ranger Battalion. So he was a chaplain for us for a long time. And I believe that he was on that deployment with us. So he would be the only one.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so teleport us forward. You get to Afghanistan. Let's talk through. I would really like to spend a lot of time on this op. I mean, it is the focus point of your book. Despite the fact that you kind of just offhandedly mentioned at the end, oh yeah, and I was in Ramadi, and I think in 06, but like the book is really dedicated to this recovery, this mission. So I'd love to spend a lot of time on it. If you could talk us through when you get into country, what is the op tempo like initially, and how long is it until this mission kicks off?
Yeah, we got in country in April of 05, and right up to that deployment. So the beginning of that year, it was actually really busy in Afghanistan. So leading up to this deployment, we were being told, you guys are going to be, going out every night. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be doing that. You're doing raids. You're going to be doing patrols. And we get in country in April. And typically they give you about 2 or 3 days to kind of get your stuff together before they start sending you on ops. That varies depending on the location, but typically at Bagram, that would be 2 or 3 days. And we kind of get our stuff ready. And in those 2 or 3 days, we were kind of watching what operations were going on, and nothing. There's nothing going on. The spec ops community was basically sitting around just training. And we were okay with that at the beginning. It's like, oh, great. We get a little more training before we head out into the field. And then it turned out, March, still training. I mean, April, we got there in April, so it wasn't March.
April, May.
So it was May. It was May, and then June, same thing. We're still training. In mid-June, we do a specific training because we're about to become the country's combat search and rescue, basically lead for the entire country. So we went out with some PJs and the 160th, and we went out and we talked about a recovery mission. If it were ever to come up, what are we going to do? What are our roles? What tools do we need? What needs to be done? Basically everything about a recovery mission. And we trained for 2 days with them. It's nonstop. And that was going to be the end of it. Like, we didn't really expect to ever have to use those skills.
Right.
It wasn't like Rangers are specialized in CSAR. That's not really our main mission. That's just something we can do. And at the time, they were trying to find work for us, basically, because it was the win the hearts and minds time of the war, not, kicking in doors. So after doing that training, using the jaws of life and learning how to pry things open, it was really fun. We just pushed all that stuff aside and said, okay, so when are we going to go out and do some fighting? And again, through the month of June, nothing.
So you really, Tony, you have not gone on a single mission at this time. Like, you're 3 months in country, you're itching to get there, and you're kind of stuck on the fob. I will admit, probably 160th and PJ joint training was probably awesome, but still, like, I'm sure you're itching for that mission.
Yeah, especially coming from the 75th Ranger Regiment, which has an extremely high op tempo, basically throughout the entire 20-year global war on terror.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was evident that this was the rarest deployment, I think, probably ever in the entire war. It was probably the slowest deployment of any platoon in anyone in the 75th Ranger Regiment. I've never heard of anyone doing less, to be honest. So I was actually upset. It was my first deployment. This is when I'm supposed to get my CIB. This is when I'm supposed to be, in battle with my buddies, and it didn't happen. So, I was frustrated. I mean, at some point in that training, we had a guy that kept messing up. He just kept messing up over and over and over. And honestly, most of us didn't know how he made it into the 75th Ranger Regiment. And I boiled over. In fact, I was so frustrated that I actually punched him. I punched him in the face, and because he kept messing up. And we were basically told by our leaders that if this keeps happening and he keeps messing up, you guys are all going to be punished, not just him, all of you. And that was my cue to, like, all right, so we need to make sure he doesn't screw up anymore. And I punched him. And basically my punishment for doing that was, Brooks, don't ever do that again. Go back to work.
Well, thank you. Probably.
Basically. I mean, he'd never said it, but I could see it in his eyes.
That's hilarious.
He wasn't mad. So that was kind of the workup to, Operation Red Wings.
I was just going to, sorry, Tony, I was just going to say, like, it's funny that you say, like, I actually punched him, because you've referenced a couple times, like, I wasn't very big, I was a nerd. And you're like, no, man, I broke, which I think is part, like, you don't want these door kickers hanging out on a base with nothing to do, because tensions probably boil over, and this kind of thing can happen. So it's very interesting to hear you describe yourself, and then, like, you just had enough, I guess. Yeah,
I think if you could have picked anyone out in the platoon that was going to throw the first punch, it would not have been me. I'd probably been towards the bottom of the list. So I think everyone was kind of surprised by it. In fact, I remember when it happened, my whole squad basically jumped on both of us. Like, everyone's like, oh my God, what the heck is going on?
It's got to be bad if Tony's taking shots at someone. Oh,
yeah. God. Now that guy, I mean, he was gone. I mean, he was done. That was basically his last chance. And he was, what we called released for standards from Ranger Regiment. So I feel bad now, because that's not really me. But it kind of had to be done. Like, it's a life or death situation in a wartime. And if you got someone that keeps messing up, someone's going to die. So a black eye is much better than someone dying.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, with what we're about to talk about, the op you're on, there isn't a whole lot of room for error. So it sounds like that's the kind of thing that could have gotten somebody hurt on that op. So yes. let's dive into Red Wings. Can you set the stage for us? What kicks it off for those who aren't familiar? And like I hope a lot of people go and pick up your book, watch Lone Survivor, and kind of really dig into this. It's a fascinating story. So set the tone for those who are not familiar with that mission.
Yeah. So we were doing what we were doing every day, nothing. And I was actually, believe it or not, I think we were earlier that day because we slept at night. We're up during the day, or we slept during the day and we're up at night. So if we woke up during the day, that was on us. And a lot of us were so bored, we were waking up during the day and we were sunbathing. Yes, sunbathing in Afghanistan.
Did you have some tanning oil or no?
I don't think we did, but I'm sure someone did. I guarantee it. It was, yeah, it was a shit show. I mean, we weren't doing anything.
Yeah.
So June 28th, I think we had just finished doing our little tanning ops, and one of my team leaders came running by. I mean, this guy, to see him run, he's not the one that would normally run for no reason. We knew something was up. And he said, "Get to the hooch. We lost a bird." And whoa, no longer are we doing anything. So we run into the hooch and he says, "A Chinook helicopter went down. It was a 160th bird." And all of us looked at each other, just like, what are you talking about? It's the middle of the day. How's it a 160th bird? Well, it turns out the 160th flew a mission in the day for Navy SEALs, which is very rare for them. So, he's given us the briefing basically saying, hey, they were going to recover a recon team that was on the ground that had been ambushed and they were shot down. And for anyone who's a military history kind of connoisseur, they've heard of Roberts Ridge. This was a very similar type incident where Rangers came in to assist a Navy SEAL team on the ground, and they were taking, RPGs into the back of the helicopter. Well, come to our June 28th, 2005, this helicopter actually got shot down. And there were 16 men on board, 8 Navy SEALs and 8 Night Stalkers, which is the Army Special Operations helicopter crews. And all of us just were dumbfounded. Like, are they alive? We didn't know. We didn't know anything about what was going on the ground other than we have a SEAL recon team on the ground, 4 guys, and we have a Chinook or an MH-47 with 16 men that were just shot out of the sky.
Real quick, Tony, the four SEAL recon, 4-man SEAL recon team, what were they doing? Why were they on the ground?
Yeah, so that team was actually on the ground to do some surveillance and reconnaissance on one specific target, and his name was Ahmad Shah. And Ahmad Shah was known in the region for, he was kind of a warlord. He was actually, believe it or not, he was anti-Taliban, but he was a warlord in the area, and he was making IEDs. And he had a factory somewhere in the mountains, and basically the Americans, we had enough. And we said, we got to find this guy. We know he's up in the mountains. We don't know where. And it was a really risky mission that a lot of recon teams said they wouldn't do. And because of the terrain and the assets that we had at the time. And the Navy SEAL team took the mission. And when they got on the ground, obviously they were compromised pretty quickly. And that's why that crew of 16 came to come pick them up.
Got it. So they're on the ground, the 16 are coming in, and it's a Night Stalker crew, which is unusual in daytime. They're shot down, and you're just hearing about it from your team leader at this time.
Yeah, just sitting in one of those, rectangle wooden huts that you have on Bagram Airfield. And all of us are in the room just waiting, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go recover everybody. We're going to go bring them home. And at the time we were thinking, okay, we're going to bring all these guys home. They're on the ground fighting right now. And we're going to go grab them. And we're going to bring them back. And we're going to have a big kumbaya party and be done with it. 12 hours in and out was what we were told. Bringing up a lot of ammo because it's going to be a big fight. Well, we get all of our gear together and start to head out for this mission. And that was basically all we had. We didn't know anything else. It was a very hasty mission. We actually got on the birds a few hours later and headed up towards the mountain. And it was a really kind of a dreary day, at least in Bagram. But once we got up into the mountains, it was thunder and lightning and foggy and raining and windy. And you couldn't see outside of the bird at all. Like I was looking out the back ramp of the 47 and I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see any lights. All I could see was just gray, black, nothing. And it was a rough ride going up in the mountains. And eventually we got the signal that, the mission, we're coming back. We're cutting this off. It's too dangerous. We can't get the bird to where we need to get it. And no one was willing to lose another helicopter full of operators. So they pulled us back. And I'll tell you what, I've never been around a more angry group of individuals in my life. We were yelling and screaming at each other, yelling and screaming at the crew. All the leaders were trying to get everybody together, and we were all pissed off because the last thing we wanted to do was be the guys that left somebody out on the mountain. And that's what it felt like at the moment. So it was rough.
And it was a nighttime movement, Tony. So it was nighttime,
it was middle of the night.
Yeah, like rain, thunder. That is a terrible combination. Wow. Okay, so you turn around and come back. I wanted to ask though, so you could use it either that instance where you're flying out and coming back, and or when you actually go out again. What's going through your head since you haven't been doing any missions? Are you feeling like this is it for real? I'm going in for the first time.
I had no clue what to expect. I was kind of looking to the guys around me again, being the young guy and looking at all my leaders to my left and my right. And most of them were just cool as a cucumber. And it's like no big deal to them. And that really kind of set the tone for me. And I just was going through kind of in my head, all right, so I'm going to get on the rope. I'm going to slide down the rope. I'm going to get down. I'm going to pull my night vision goggles down, and I'm going to pull out and get into the fight because I'm expecting it to be a fight on the ground. So my job, instantly I'm thinking in my head, as soon as I hit that ground, I'm finding the nearest cover and I'm returning fire. So that's kind of what's going through my head as I'm sitting in the bird. But also in the back of my mind, I'm looking at the guys around me and I'm like, that guy's never that serious. Why is he so serious? Kind of questioning what was going on.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay. So
and that was both times, both coming out and going back out once again. So, it's pretty interesting. I'm the closest thing to a civilian you can get out there, right?
Come on. How long until you guys refit and head back out again? Are we talking less than 24 hours?
We actually, that night, the weather was so bad, we went into the day and they were not willing to put us out there in the daytime. They said, this is how we lost a bird already. We're not doing it again. So we had to wait till the next cycle of darkness before we moved out. Wow. And we were just at JBAD at one of the police headquarters buildings, just kind of sleeping on the floor, not sleeping really, not at all. In fact, I vaguely remember a huge camel spider crawling on the ground around us.
Oh my God.
I about lost it because I wasn't sleeping already. And then I saw that dog with 8 legs walking around, and there was no sleeping after that. So, when darkness came the next night, I was already delirious going on to the mission, which is never a good thing.
So for those who haven't seen a camel spider, go ahead and Google that with the lights on, like in a happy spot, because your life will never be the same. Those are some nasty, I call them an animal. Like they're not really an insect or
it's a dog with 8 legs.
It is. Okay. So you could have been like, hey man, you got to get on this thing and go anywhere else, like to the moon. I'd be like, yeah, go for it. If there's a camel spider in the room, I'm leaving. Okay, so you get back out of the bird, you're flying in. Take us through the fast rope and getting onto target.
Yeah, so obviously flying out to target again. It was very foggy still the next day. Wasn't rainy, it was still windy, very foggy and dark. So as we're flying into where they're going to put us, which by the way, they gave us about 3 different options of where they might put us, but they wouldn't know until they're in the air. So, we're looking at not maps, mind you, but satellite imagery, because that's all we had. And we're flying out to target in this soup of, gray and darkness. And we finally get to our call that we're going to be roping in, because we didn't know if we were going to land or we're going to rope. We assumed rope, but you never know. And we were told it was a rope. And we get to the area where we're about to rope, and obviously the bird flares. That's when you know that here we go. And the ropes drop. I see my squad leader up front. He's the rope master, so he's in charge of making sure that that rope is on the ground so that all of our guys can safely, take a foothold on the ground. And he normally gives a thumbs up to us as he's looking down at the rope, because he sees a chem light at the bottom, and he knows if I see 2 chem lights, it's laying on the ground. If I see only 1, they're on top of each other. So if you put them next to each other, you can see 2 from above. Otherwise, you see just 1. And he looked and he just shook his head. All of us are like, what the hell does that mean?
That is not a good signal.
I don't know what that means. So that was not something we had gone over. And then he just gets on the rope and goes. So all of us instinctively said, well, our squad leader's going, so we're going. And I think, I don't remember exactly what position I was in. I remember writing it in the book, but I don't remember exactly. And I get down the rope, and I just remember gripping onto that thing like my life depended on it. Because remember, I came into the Army after watching Black Hawk Down. And if anyone remembers what happens in the infill on Black Hawk Down, was that the young private went to go get on the rope, and an RPG was fired at the helicopter, and it had to shift. And he fell off, and he actually died. So I had a hold of that rope. I don't think there was anything that could have knocked me off of that rope. And I'm sliding down and I'm sliding down. I'm gripping this thing as tight as I can. My hands are getting hot through the leather gloves. And all I could think of was like, okay, this has got to be near the end. My hands are starting to get a little hot. Got to be near the end. And it's like 10 feet, and then 10 more feet, and then 10 more feet. And it just kept going. The longest rope I'd ever done up until that point was maybe 40 feet. And I was in training. And at 40 feet, your hands are burning pretty bad. Well, I was in my head counting like every 10 seconds. I know it's about a second to slide. And every second is about 10 feet.
10 feet.
Roughly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm like kind of counting in my head, and I'm like, okay, that's 50 feet. That's got to be about 60 feet. Oh my God, 70, 80, 90. The next thing I know, I'm slapped onto the ground. And because I couldn't see anything, there was nothing that could be seen out there. So I was just waiting for the ground.
Yeah.
And it hit me hard. I landed flat on my back, knocked the wind out of me. And I was kind of waffling around on the ground. And thankfully, we had someone smart enough who was more senior than myself, to start clearing people out. So grabbing people and pulling them out of the way so that the guy above him doesn't land on top of his head. And it was, every time I looked back to see guys coming down the rope, I could see just people landing flat on their back, on their face. No one could see. So no one could see anything. So it was like, honestly, if I could have a video of that, it would probably be funny to watch now. But it was awful. And not to mention, when they roped us in, it was the only clearing that we could find. And the pilots, there's no way they could have known this, but it happened to be a logged area. So there were a bunch of downed logs. So trees were downed. So you didn't land on the dirt, you landed in between some trees. and there you couldn't find your footing because there was no footing. So it was like the worst scenario as far as, I'm surprised we didn't have any broken legs.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, what about the radio operator? Doesn't he get mangled up on this?
He does. He actually, because the radio is so heavy, he comes flying down that rope. And I can't even imagine how fast he had to have been coming down that rope. But he hit hard because I could hear it. And then I heard the sound you never want to hear in combat. It was like the screech of pain. And come to find out it was the radio operator, that someone actually, he came in hot and landed, and he was okay. The next guy that came in landed right on top of him. Compound fracture to his arm. And you could hear it. You could hear the screech. You could hear the cracking sound. And I was probably 20 or 30 feet away. Actually, probably about 30 feet. And I could hear the sound of his arm as well as his screech in pain. So I was just on a knee.
Yeah, and it's not like they can just hoist him back up, right? I mean, he has to stick it out.
I mean, I think in some cases they would have, like tried to get him out, but in this particular scenario, as soon as that last guy hit the ground, that rope was falling right behind him, and that bird was gone.
Yeah,
and they were gone fast. I've never seen a bird move that fast, and for good reason. I mean, we had just lost a bird, and we were going into a hostile area, and we didn't know what to expect on the ground at all. We had no idea what the enemy force was like, because even our air assets, the drones, and we had a AC-130, they couldn't see everything clearly either because of the weather. So it was really, going into the unknown.
So how pumped up are you feeling at that point in time, now that you're on the ground, the aircraft is gone, it's probably getting quiet again? What's going through your head?
It was too quiet. That was what's going through my head. Based on what we were told, it was going to be a big fight. And when we got on the ground and we were getting ready to move, it was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. And to me, that was the most eerie thing, was how quiet it was, because I was ready to fight, and I was expecting at any moment that I was going to hear that AK cracking towards us. And it didn't come, thank God. But, even though it didn't come, I was always thinking, here it comes. Any moment, we're going to go around this corner, and there it is. Nope, not there. So I think as a new soldier on the ground, what you expect war to be is more about the fighting, not about what you feel when you're waiting to fight, because that's way worse.
Yeah.
When you're in the fight, it's quick. You just react. There's not a lot of thinking. You fall back on your training. But when you're waiting for the fight, there's a lot of thinking. And that's what's kind of unique about, I think, the story that I wrote, is I tried to give that perspective of what it's like to wait for war.
And you hadn't slept for like 24 hours also. So you kind of have to be at the tippest point of your spirit to just like be on it and recognize what's going on. But it takes so much. I don't know if people realize that, but like how much attention and energy it can take just trying to be really at your best, because you're worried at any moment you could get hit. It can drain you, especially when you're already tired, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, I had so much adrenaline going at that point that I don't think there's any way I could have even thought about being tired, because I was like the Energizer Bunny out there. But of course, that has to come to an end at some point.
Yep. Yeah.
I just didn't know when it was. And so I think a lot of me was trying to hold that back. Like, don't get too excited, because we don't know when this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And this mission, I think, was unique in the fact that we were out there for so long.
So let's diving into that. You're on the ground, you kind of consolidate, you got at least one injury in the crew. Is the first objective here, hey, we just got to get to the crash site?
Yep, that was basically the only thing that was on our mind, was we got to get to where that bird is and get our guys out. They're probably fighting right now. In fact, we were listening. We didn't hear any gunfire. We weren't that far away that we should be able to hear it. I think we were on on a map it was about 3 miles. In reality, it was probably about 3 times that based on terrain.
Yeah.
And that was also a big surprise to us because we knew it was bad terrain just based on, experience and the imagery. But looking at it from above on satellite imagery, it's very deceiving when you start walking it.
Yeah.
Because you cannot see how bad it really is.
And it's wooded, right? I mean, in that particular area, as you said, you had to fast rope in because of the canopy. So not only is it steep, long distance, but it sounds like you're also kind of maneuvering between the trees.
Yeah, it's actually very wooded. And I think the common misconception about Afghanistan is that it's all desert, right? Well, it's not. Once you get up in the mountains, there's a lot of trees. I grew up in the Northern California area outside of the Sierra Nevadas, and I'd say it resembles that more than a desert.
Mm-hmm.
And so thick tree lines and a lot of underbrush, and you can't see very far because of those trees. So when you're maneuvering through this mountainside with the terrain and the trees, I mean, you're lucky to see 100 meters ahead of you in a good spot. So it's very obvious why, that 4-man SEAL team got scuffed up the way they did. I mean, the terrain and the trees, they didn't stand a chance. If you just get just in the wrong spot, they could have 2 guys or 50 guys. It doesn't matter because they have a terrain advantage. Yeah. So it was a nasty place for a fight. You don't really want to fight in that.
So tell me about walking up on the wreckage. Assuming you're moving to the objective there, you get there. What's that like for the team? How do you start processing this?
Yeah, well, the first part was just getting to the crash site was hellacious. I mean, the terrain and, at points we're crawling on all fours and sliding down rocks, and it was awful. But once we got to the actual crash site, all you could kind of see was a little bit of a glow and some smoke. And we were just far enough away that you couldn't really tell what you were seeing, other than there's definitely a fire there, and there's definitely some smoke. That's about it. And for anyone who doesn't know how big a Chinook helicopter is, I mean, if you see a city bus, put 2 rotors on it, actually it's probably one of those probably close to a double city bus with 2 rotors. That's what the size of it. It's huge. So the fact that I couldn't see it was a little bit disturbing. I'm like, well, where the heck is this thing? I obviously see fire. And so there's a lot going through our head as we're sitting back a little ways away, waiting for, confirmation of whether, fighters there, where our guys there moving around. We don't want to walk up on them and get shot ourselves. So we were trying to make communication with anyone there, and PJs, which the pararescuemen in the Air Force, actually pushed up ahead of us, and they slowly moved their way to the crash site. And when they got there, they were there for like probably 2 or 3 minutes, and then they came right back. And I remember the look on their faces as they walked up. And it was like, honestly, like they had been, you just poked a hole and deflated them. And they said, there's no one, everyone's dead. So at that moment, it was no longer a rescue mission. We knew that it was a recovery. So we had to switch our mindset to, yeah, we might possibly save some Americans, to now we got to bag up our buddies to send home to their families. And that was pretty deflating and depressing, especially being that, I was there to fight. I was there to win. I was there to, avenge 9/11, so to speak. And my first experience in war was seeing my dead buddies, basically.
It's very interesting in the book, the way you present it. And I don't want to give anything away here, so I'll let you tell this part of it, but just what you have to do going through that crash site. Like, can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think you do a great job of describing it in the book. It's really well done.
Yeah. So when you get to any type of crash site, first thing you have to do is kind of secure the area to make sure that there are no enemy, there are no booby traps, there are no other factors that are going to slow you down as far as recovering remains and equipment. So you kind of spread out and you walk through the site, kind of just looking, and you see there's a guy there, there's a guy there, there's some equipment, and you're just kind of taking mental note of where everything is, and you're pushing through and pushing back through. And then your job is to really inventory the guys or the personnel. And you have to make sure you have everyone that you're looking for, because, like we learned in Vietnam, not so much in the global war, but in Vietnam, when you had a crashed pilot, a lot of those guys would evade and escape for days in the woods. So we had to be sure that we didn't have anyone else running for their lives. And we knew there were 16 men. So we were just kind of going through and making sure we had 16. And it took us quite a while to find everybody. In fact, we got to a point where we had 15 out of the 16 identified. And a lot of us were kind of huddled around and we're like, okay, we need to make sure. We need to go through this with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that we don't have someone on the run. And, after hours of searching, we still could not find that 16th person. It wasn't until some new eyes came into the group that he finally found the 16th person. And as much of a relief as that was, it was also like our hope was gone, because when you know that there's only 15, you think, heck yeah, someone's out there fighting, someone's out there, hiding, and now we got to go find them. Well, when the 16th was found, it was like relief that we've got 16, because we at least know they're not being tortured or captured, but we also know that they're all deceased. So not exactly the victory we were hoping for. And then after that, yeah.
Nope, keep going. Sorry.
I was going to say, after that, our job was to actually bag them up.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. I mean, when you go to pick up someone who's alive, they're heavy. They're very heavy. It's not easy. In fact, a lot of military training involves like carrying your buddy and running and things like that. Well, when someone's deceased and they've been out there for 24 hours plus, they get a lot heavier and they get bloated. And it's a really ugly scene to see someone that you saw days before, laying there lifeless. So at that point, we just had to make sure we got everyone and all of their gear in their bag, so to speak.
Literally picking up people and putting them into bags.
Yeah.
God dang. Yeah.
Yeah. Limbs, equipment. I mean, you name it. I mean, it was, at the time, as I'm doing this, it was so mission oriented. It was so driven by, it was about them, not me. It did it easily. It's hard to like explain that it was not as hard as you would think when you have something greater pushing you. But it really, at the time, it wasn't as bad as it sounds. It wasn't until after, like right after, when you realize what just happened. Yeah. And you have to process it. It's like, that was horrible. And no one should have to experience that. So, yeah, it's really tough. That's why I wrote the book, because it's so hard to like explain it to you on video.
And can you mention the ring? Isn't there a wedding band that's involved here? It's kind of a neat story that you wrap up the book with that I really liked.
Yeah, so it's kind of a unique moment where we had finished recovering all 16 bodies, and we were kind of doing our little kumbaya meeting, debrief / what's next. And one of the guys, came over and said, we didn't find Commander Reich's wedding band. It's not inventoried. I don't see it anywhere. And he had it. because this guy knew Commander Reich. And he said he was recently married. He definitely had it on, no doubt. And we need to find it. And everyone looked around like, what do you mean? What do you mean we need to find it? Well, they said, it's there. It's in that helicopter, or the remnants of that helicopter. So all of us at that moment were like, all right, let's do this. And all of us essentially got on our hands and knees in this helicopter crash. There wasn't much left of it. I mean, it was amazing sight to see that what could happen to one of those birds, but there was basically nothing left. It was just a pile of ash, and we were on our hands and knees digging through this ash and these hot embers. There was still some pretty hot embers in there, and kind of sifting, hands and knees, sifting through the ash and the dirt, trying to find a wedding band. And we're in this war zone. We have downloaded all of our body armor, which, hindsight's 2020. We wouldn't have worn body armor if we knew the terrain and exactly what we were getting into. But we took off our body armor, we took our weapons off and placed it on top of our armor. And we were basically in our t-shirts and our pants, on our hands and knees in the middle of Afghanistan looking for a ring. And it took us, probably 2 hours of sifting, and all of us were pretty exhausted and sweaty and nasty. And it was the coolest thing ever. You hear someone kind of off to the side, and I got it. And all of us like almost instantaneously jumped up, like with a big fist, like completely excited that we'd found this wedding ring. And I think these are the stories that war kind of like movies mostly, they leave out, because a lot of guys don't want to tell that story. It's not that exciting, right? Whoop-de-doo, they found a ring. But in my opinion, I think that was one of the best side stories that I put into that book, because it really was more about the people, right? That ring, it's just a piece of metal. It's worthless. Like, it's not really, doesn't mean anything, but it did. It meant so much to that spouse and to that relationship that we took the time to find it in a war zone. So I'm very proud to have been a part of that, for sure.
You do get it back to her, which is the kind of that cool full circle moment.
Yeah. And it's funny because I didn't find out that she actually got the ring until I decided to write this book, because that was always been something in the back of my head. Like, I remember finding that ring. I wonder if she ever got it. And I reached out to her 2019, and I said, I was trying to be as non-invasive as possible, because the last thing I wanted to do was to bring up this horrible trauma back into her life. And so I just told her who I was, and I was part of Operation Red Wings, and we got into a little conversation. And one of the things that came up was, I said, I actually have a question for you. Did you ever get anything from that day from out there? And it was like probably 10 seconds later that I get a message on Facebook, and it was a picture. So I click it and I open it, and it's a picture of her holding her hand next to her husband's photo. And like, I'm not gonna lie, I lost my shit.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Like, I was bawling like a baby. I couldn't even type to respond. Like,
That's really cool.
That was the moment I was like, I gotta tell people about this. This is cool.
I mean, I can't even believe you found that thing in the debris. The odds of finding something that's like that in a whole heap of metal is astounding.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing in a small helicopter, but this is a 47.
Yeah.
Like this is huge bird. I mean, you could put 40 guys in the back of that thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, the fact that it was found is, I mean, it just tells you how it was mostly, I think, the PJs really they know their job so well. They said, well, he was the commander, so this is where he would have been in the bird. So let's focus on this area, and then we'll slowly just move our way out.
Yeah.
And we did. We found it, like it's obvious where he would have been, right? And he was there. So like he went out doing his job.
Yeah.
I mean, how cool is that guy gave everything to the last possible second.
Last second.
Like I am so honored and proud to have, been able to be a part of that. Obviously, I wish he was still here, and I'm sad that he's gone, but I'm so proud of him. Like he went out how any of us would have gone out, fighting to the last second. So very honorable. And I hope his family really appreciates that, that's a dedicated human.
Yeah.
Like he was special. So yeah, I'm just so proud to have had that moment to be able to give that to her. That ring is more powerful than that piece of metal.
Okay. So we just talked through the ring. You're at the crash site. You've got the 16 bodies finally all accounted for. Why not go home at that point? What is still left to do for y'all?
Yeah. So after completing the recovery of the crew of Turbine 33, we were still unaware of where the 4-man Navy SEAL reconnaissance team was. And, coming into the mission, it was like, we didn't really know what happened to those guys. So after the helicopter recovery, we were going to see if we assumed they were there, but they weren't. So our next job was to figure out where they were. And, we had just finished recovery. We were pretty tired after spending an all day recovering. And we had about 3 or 4 hours left of daylight. And our job then was, okay, well, let's go find those guys. We have no clue where they are. And all we did is base it off of where we thought radio pings were coming from. So they sent us on a patrol. And this was about a 2-mile patrol, basically straight downhill. And we were moving pretty fast because we knew that time was not on our side as far as, if we had some injured guys on the ground. And essentially our job was to just move as fast as we could to these areas to see if they were still where we thought they might be. And, we're just booking it through this terrain. Like you should never move this fast in a war zone and in this fashion. We're like ducks in a row, moving down trails as fast as we can. So we couldn't spread out and move fast. So we had to stay tight and just book it. And we were all in a line, which again, you've been to Ranger school, so you wouldn't ever do that.
I have not been. So
you haven't? Okay.
I was a pilot. So all I know is what I see from above, but I can understand that.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to move through anywhere. But our job at this point was, we got to get to these guys as fast as possible. So we got to take some risk. And that's what we did. We just moved in a line and moved as fast as we could. And, we went down 2 to 3 miles straight downhill, and we get to a spot where we thought they might be, and nothing. There was absolutely nothing. There's no evidence of fight. There's no evidence of anything in the area. So again, we're all exhausted. We were with some Navy SEALs. We were with SEAL Team 10. And of course, we get into squabbles with them because they want to go to another location, and we had just finished all the recovery, which they weren't there for. They came in after, and they wanted to go one way and we wanted to go the other way. Well, and the commanders wanted us to go back. So there was like 3 different opinions at the time, and everyone was squabbling and kind of barking back and forth at each other. And eventually the commanders won the day, and we had to head back to the crash site. So it was straight uphill, and we had about an hour and a half to do that. because we were getting word that they wanted to drop some ordnance in the area. And we didn't know anything about it other than you got to get back so that way they can drop it, because we're not going to drop it with you guys out. And so our job was to basically run straight uphill. And we did. We spent a whole day basically carrying bodies and running through the mountains. So naturally, as we're going up the hill, people are falling out. And, we had a machine gun team from SEAL Team 10 that, they're carrying a Mark 48 and a lot of ammo. So they were hurting bad. But we all made it back up to the mountain, and we created an HLZ up at the top so that they could come and recover bodies. And it was pretty amazing to watch Chinook fly into right where another one was shot down 2 days before. And I can only imagine, you being a pilot, you probably could relate to this, but I can only imagine what was going through their head, thinking, I can see that other remnants of that bird as I'm coming in to come pick up these bodies. But of course they did it, because that's what you do in the military. You just do your job.
I'm sure they're a lot like you, though, where they were thinking like, hey, that was a crew. I probably went to flight school. I knew these guys. I'll do anything to go pull them out. Yeah,
that was definitely the sentiment of the crew that we came into contact after, because that was their buddies.
Yeah.
They were probably eating lunch earlier that day.
Exactly.
So yeah, they would have done anything.
Did you guys leave when you went on that patrol before they start dropping ordnance? Did you guys leave like a security element with the bodies?
Yeah. So we had 2 full platoons of Rangers up there. And really it was like it was basically 2 squads minus. So not 2 full squads from a platoon that went on this patrol. Okay. It was a pretty small element.
Yeah. Damn. Okay. So you get back up and then they drop. Is that what comes next here?
Yeah. They actually waited to drop the ordnance till the next day. And I'm not sure why, but I was a little upset because we just ran up that hill for nothing.
That just sounds so much like the Army, though.
Yeah. So yeah, once we got back up to the top, they basically said, you guys are done for the day. Like, we're going to start losing men if we keep pushing you guys. And they were probably right. I just remember sitting down at the end of that day, and I felt like blood was pooling in my feet. Like, they were so swollen, like they were hurting. My whole body was like, you need to sleep, but not going to happen. So they told us to get some sleep because we're going to do more patrols the next day. And we tried. I remember laying down and looking up at the sky and just close your eyes, go to sleep. And 10 minutes later, you'd wake right up. And it was like that all night. Pretty wild. You can sleep a lot of places, but after that experience, I doubt anyone got any sleep. I really do. Every time I looked at someone, they were awake. So
I was listening to your book, the Audible version, while running early in the morning when it was dark out. And I think you described, like, I don't know if you were on guard duty or not, or if you had just been relieved and you're trying to go to sleep and somebody yells in the group, like, I can't remember what happened to him. Maybe it was a camel spider. I don't think so. But.
Yeah. So yeah, I was laying there, and it was the screech that you've never heard a screech like this before. It was like absolute horror screech. Like, the first thing in your mind is, oh my God, someone just got stabbed or shot, or they got their throat slit. Now, who knows, right? Come to find out, the screech was because some 4-legged animal, which we still don't know what it was, like, ran right in front of them at speeds that you couldn't even imagine. And whoever it was, and we still have not figured out who it was. We have an idea, but we're not quite sure because we'll give them a hard time.
Yeah.
Screamed like it was like a Halloween, like Michael
Like a
Myers
witch.
type scream. Yeah. And yeah, when the story finally came out that it was a four-legged, some type of cat, or maybe a monkey, because there were monkeys up there, just ran right in front of him.
God.
and he was half asleep, probably, droning at least.
Yeah.
In it, he thought he was being overrun by the Taliban.
Or a camel spider, which I would have done the same if that was a possibility, man. Okay.
Yeah,
Got
that
it.
was quite the moment, because I have some pretty tough dudes that were up on that mountain with me, and one of the guys got on the radio and like, shut the F up. So
Okay. So you guys are back at basically at the crash site. They evac the bodies out, and then sounds like they drop some ordnance while you're watching. You guys are, if I recall, running low on some water and food. When do you get up and start moving again, looking for Luttrell and the crew?
yeah, as soon as the sun was up, we were prepping for movement, and which is, it's so weird to think about it now, because every other time we moved at night, but in this terrain, how bad it was, they didn't want us moving at night. They just said, even with night vision under that canopy, you're not going to be able to see shit. So you guys can move in the day. And that's unheard of for the 75th Ranger Regiment. I mean, if we're doing a day mission, something's not going to go good, because we tend to be a little more violent than the most units. And the more we can see, the more we can shoot, so to speak. So yeah, they don't send us out in the day very often. And I have some stories about being out in the day in Ramadi, which they quickly changed that SOP. But yeah, so we went out first thing in the morning, and it was actually slightly after first thing in the morning, because they dropped 3 500-pound JDAMs on what they believed to be Ahmad Shah's factory. And our job at that point was to chase this JDAM to make sure we killed that guy. So we were getting all of our gear together, ready to move out as fast as we could, because with the Taliban and with the insurgents in the area, they don't like to leave bodies laying around. So we knew we had to get there fast, because we needed to confirm that we got him. So we got all of our gear ready, and we were just booking it out again, downhill into a valley. It was the Korangal Valley, which has been pretty infamous over the years.
Yeah.
But at the time, it hadn't been infamous. It was slightly thereafter that it became very well known. But we were running down through this valley, trying to find where they dropped this bomb. So that was our next task.
But not looking for the 4-man team anymore.
We had another couple patrols going on that were looking for them.
Okay, got it.
So my particular platoon was assigned to the JDAM, which I write this in the book, that when they said they were going to drop the JDAMs, I was a little dumbfounded. Like, I remember looking at my team leader and being like, so we're dropping JDAMs. Does that mean we know where our SEALs are at?
Right.
And he just kind of gave me the death stare, like straight into my eyes, and said nothing.
Yeah.
And that is, I knew what the answer was. It was, no, we don't know where they are, but we think we know where the bad guy is.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, still to this day, that gives me a little anxiety thinking about it, because, they could have easily been holding those SEALs. And
right.
I don't want to be the one to bear the bad news there, but, we didn't know. Bottom line.
Did you end up getting in proximity to do a BDA on that JDAM?
Yeah. So the next, as we get down into the village and we finally get down to that JDAM site, it was hard to find, to be honest. So we were walking through this village trying to find where the bomb had landed, and we could not find it anywhere. There were no buildings destroyed. It's like, what the heck? You sure it's here? Yeah, we're sure. It's right there. You guys are walking right near it. You look around, like open your eyes. And all of us are just looking at each other like, there's no building here. What are you talking about? Well, we walked through a field, and what we thought was a field, but it turns out there was a building there at some point, and it was not a farm field. But the building was completely destroyed. There was nothing left. There were some chunks of dirt, but there's no concrete or anything like that in that area. So basically there was nothing. And of course, command, really wants confirmation that Ahmad Shah is dead. So I said, we need you guys to CCE that site, or SSE that site.
SSE.
And yeah. And all of us kind of looked at each other like, so what the heck are we going to do? There's nothing.
So SSE, for those who don't know, right? Sensitive site exploitation, like get all the goodies out of there and catalog them and bring them back if there's intel and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, SSE, we're going to be sweeping through and finding anything that's of importance, anything that could be intel, anything that can be evidence of someone dying. And my commander, I remember this clearly, got on the radio, called back to Bagram and said, there's nothing to SSE here. If you really want it done, we're going to need heavy machinery, because we got to dig, probably 10 feet into the earth. And we don't even have shovels. We don't have gloves. We have nothing. And of course, the answer back was, I don't care what equipment you don't have. Do the job. And essentially what it came down to was a pissing match back and forth, that obviously we couldn't do it. It would have taken us 3 weeks to do it by hand. And that was the end of it. Well, as we were kind of moving out of the area, we saw something. We were like, wait a minute. Or my team leader, he says, oh, got something. He's poking it with a stick. And I just see him over there like poking. And he goes, get over here. You got to see this. And I looked down, and it was basically a hand, like that much of it. No wrist, just a hand. And it was like probably about 2/3 the size of my own hand. I'm like, oh, man, that's a small person. And of course, someone goes, oh, it's a kid. It's like, I don't know if it's a kid. It's probably a teenager. And of course, that was not a sight anyone wants to see, because you're assuming a teenager is probably not the guy you wanted. Then again, in Afghanistan, teenagers are fighters. So, a lot of us were thinking, okay, it was probably a bad guy, but in the back of our heads, we're thinking, what if it wasn't?
Yeah.
What if it was a kid? And none of us want that. And come to find out, I didn't find out until many years later that my platoon leader went back to that same site a couple years later as a commander and was interviewing basically all the villagers. And he asked him about that. He asked him, do you remember when we dropped bombs on your village? And they all remembered. And they said, yeah, you killed a bunch of insurgents that were basically taking over this building.
Wow.
So we didn't get Ahmad Shah, because we got him. He was killed later by Pakistani police. But at the time, we, in the back of our heads, we were thinking, yeah, we might have killed some kids. Great. So we bagged up bodies all day the day before, and today we're killing kids. So yeah, it was not, I would say my first experience in war was shit.
Not what you expected.
No, not what I expected, and definitely not what the books are writing about, right? I think I had a pretty unique experience as far as the level of shit.
Yeah.
But I just remember sitting there talking to my squad leader, and he was basically trying to just kill some time, and he asked me what I thought of my first mission. And I just looked at him and straight up said, yeah, not what I thought it was going to be. And then he replied to me like, not me either.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of how war goes, right? Nothing's ever as you expect
No.
it to be.
That's one of the things, a question I end up asking everybody. In your case, it was slightly different because I knew this was the mission, but I always like to ask people what their first combat experience was, like the first time they're going outside the wire, because it's so different. Like what you just described is one thing. Tom Satterley, who was in Delta, like his first fight was Black Hawk Down. The first time he was like really engaged was that mission, and then there's like mine was just a flight where nothing happened, but you're so amped up and it just varies so much for each person. So yeah, yours is quite it's quite a story.
It's funny because, obviously your first experience on a mission was more the norm. Like that's
Yes,
more of a
for
normal
sure.
experience.
Yep.
And none of us expect that though. All of us
No.
expect it to be that firefight.
Guns
Or that
blazing.
huge
Day
yeah.
one.
Yeah,
But it's
no,
not.
everyone thinks that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anyone that didn't expect that. And this definitely wasn't what I expected. So definitely a unique start to my military career.
Okay, so you wrap up BDA, then what comes next? When do we find Luttrell?
Yeah, so as we were doing all that, our third platoon was on a patrol to try to find the Navy SEAL recon team. And during that patrol, they got some intel from a local base that, and I think it was Asadabad, that someone is there and they're saying they have an American in their village. And they passed us that intel. And we were at the JDAM site where we were committed to it. Third platoon was closer. So third platoon was assigned to go after this village. Now, being where we were, as far as in the country, all of us are like, oh, here it is. This is the setup. They're going to try and kill more of us. So third platoon knew this. Their platoon leader was an amazing human. I mean, this guy was a former enlisted guy. He was in CAG for many years, reached a high, I think he became an E8 and then became an officer. And I just got an email actually from someone today that he may have been a warrant officer in between there and a PA. So I don't know if that's true. I've never heard that, but regardless, he became an officer and he was a platoon leader in the 75th Ranger Regiment. So that alone is a career. And he led his platoon minus, it wasn't a full platoon because of weight to get us on the mountain. Neither of us had full platoons. And he led his platoon into this village, knowing in his head, thinking, okay, so we're going to get ambushed when we hit this village, but we got to get there fast. So he split his element and sent someone ahead to move a little bit faster, which I don't think many military officers would do that. But he was, he had so much experience that he said, the risk is, or the reward is much more worth the risk. Mm-hmm. So he went for it and he took a chance. And that may be the reason we have Marcus Luttrell alive right now. Because, when they got into the village, they couldn't find Marcus anywhere. And, it was starting to get a little hairy because they said they had an American and they brought us here and there's no American and we're stuck right in the middle of this village. So it's like, okay, when's the gunfire going to start? Yeah. And it wasn't moments later that they see some kind of scuffling off in the corner. Like obviously something's going on over there. That might be our firefight. Come to find out, Rangers do what Rangers do. They run towards it and to try to see what's going on. And they're basically, Marcus is in this little tiny hole in the ground and Rangers reach down and pull him out. And I don't know what the villagers were trying to do. They claim they were trying to save him or hide him. I think that's up for debate. He'd been there a while and I think they probably were getting restless. And that's what our thinking was the whole time was, even if he is in safe hands, how long is he going to be in safe hands? So, Lieutenant English at the time, he, instantly got to Marcus and started interviewing him. And Marcus quickly, during the interview, kept interrupting him, stopping him. How many guys do you have? Understandably, right? He'd just been ambushed. All of his buddies were killed. He's been basically hiding out in this village by himself. And he sees like maybe 10 Rangers in front of him. And he's thinking, oh shit, we are in trouble. You guys better have more guys. And Lieutenant English, being the smart guy that he is, was thinking, okay, he is under the influence of somebody else. As soon as I tell him how many guys we have, we're screwed.
Wow.
So he never gave it up.
Interesting.
He just kept saying, we have enough.
Yeah.
We have enough guys. Those are the things that only great leaders are quick to think about, because he didn't have a lot of time to react to that.
No.
But looking back on it, that could have been, assuming that there was someone listening to what the information Marcus was trying to get, that could have been an ambush. Now, thankfully it wasn't. And Marcus, being the guy that he is, probably would never do that. He would never give in to that, but you never know when you're captive.
Yeah. So they recover him. You guys get word where you are that they got him?
Yeah. So we were at that JDAM site when we heard that we have a jackpot. We got our eagle. And yeah, that was a pretty awesome moment, knowing that somebody had survived that hell. Like, I don't know anyone. After seeing the terrain, there's no way I would have survived that. So if anything, I don't care what anyone says about Marcus. He is a hero just for getting out of there. I've heard so many bad things said about him over the years. It just really bothers me, because I've seen the terrain and I know there's really no way out of there. So he's a miracle as far as I'm concerned.
How accurate is the terrain in the movie, and the movie itself, Lone Survivor, just to the events that you're describing? How close does it get to what you experienced?
Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with how they depicted it as far as the terrain. It's probably a little more harsh than they depicted, but they did a dang good job.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm really impressed, actually.
So you got jackpot. You guys have done your BDA. You move back to the crash site. You get exfilled out. Is there any contact that takes place at this time?
No, they don't actually. Yeah, there was some contact earlier on in the mission, actually, when we were recovering the crash site, but it was a very small amount of contact. And it was, a bunch of AKs and RPGs being fired at us from way too far away, completely ineffective. And our air assets, quickly took care of them.
Yeah.
So if you were in the area, that would have been your your job.
I think you had an A-10, you said, right? An A-10.
Yeah, it was an A-10, and they used the 275 rockets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they weren't messing around. And it was quite interesting, because we hear them go off and we're like, that's it? And we hear, yep, they're gone. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. That's
all right.
Pretty impressive.
Oh, God.
Seconds, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the only contact that we came across. And that was when we were covering the crash site. So we were out of our gear when we heard the AKs cracking. We're like, oh, great.
Of course.
We run back to our gear. Yeah. We run back to our gear and grab it. But within 30 seconds, that A-10 had just wiped them off the face of the earth. So pretty impressive as far as air assets go.
So
the only other kind of contact, it was more of like a show of force, was they used AC-130s and A-10s, and I think there was Predator out there as well, and they were basically lighting up the mountainside before they exfilled Marcus and before they exfilled us, to kind of just prep the objective, so to speak.
So you get back to the base. How are you feeling about what just went down? Like, I mean, for your first mission, what's the relief or feeling like for you coming off of the ramp of that bird at the end of all that?
Honestly, it was 7 days. We were out there for a week, and I maybe slept. I think on a good night, I maybe got an hour, and it was like in 10-minute periods because you just wake up.
Yeah.
And so a week of basically no sleep. When you walked off the bird, I do remember this actually. We were walking off the bird, and there was I think he was a colonel. I was a little delirious, but he made a point to shake every single person's hand that walked off that bird. I'll never forget it. And I wish I would have paid more attention, but how tired I was. And I saw him at the end of the ramp, and I was trying to do this like little maneuver to get around him because I just wanted to just get off and get back. But I saw him going up to every single person. He was getting in our way on purpose because he wanted to thank us. And I believe he was a 160th commander.
Yeah.
Thanking us. But I was so delirious, I don't remember those details.
Yeah.
I just remember feeling like the adrenaline just shut off. Like the second I walked off that bird, and it was like my legs wouldn't work. And the only thing I could think of was, I just got to go lay down.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. We got all of our gear and slowly worked our way back. And I do have a picture. We took a picture. I don't know why we decided to take a picture, but we took a picture right when we got back to and downloaded our gear. And I looked like I had rolled around in the dirt, and I lost like 15 pounds. And all of us had these really big DCU tops on because none of us fit in them anymore. And we just looked all beat up and angry.
I've seen the picture. It's a cool one to have. I mean, it tells the story, right? And this discussion we just had, we did not do justice. I did not, to how difficult those 7 days were in terms of the sleep, the fatigue, the lack of supplies, that sort of thing, which the book really gets into that. So anyway, it's another good reason for people to get the book. But I did want to ask, before you went to sleep, did you check to see if the unicorn had emailed you?
I wish I could say yes to that, but I did not.
Okay. But she was in contact, right? Like this was not lost contact for the deployment.
Yeah. So actually we were emailing quite a bit on that deployment, and they were very sterile emails because I couldn't say anything about where I was or what I was doing. And it was always, she would ask questions and I would respond with, well, how was your day? So it was, I'm surprised she kept emailing me back. I don't remember if I told her I won't be able to talk about anything, but I may have. I just remember some of those emails where she was asking, how's the weather? And she was just trying to make good conversation, and I would just have to skip it.
Oh God.
Pretty frustrating.
So look, I've taken up a lot of your time. I will get you out of here soon, Tony. And I wonder if one day we could do a round 2 to talk about Ramadi, because I just think that would be fascinating to hear. But there were a couple other things I just wanted to touch on with this. Okay. One is, well, first of all, is there anything else about the mission you think we should talk about before I kind of jump forward to some post-mission stuff?
I mean, it was mostly terrain and weather and lack of food and sleep that was the big crux of that mission. So I think we covered most of that.
Okay. So on a lighter note, I think you almost allude to it in the book. One of the guys on the team is like, when I get out of here, I'm going to go rob a bank. What happens with that?
Yeah. So first of all, the guy who said that was one of these guys that has a story for everything. No matter what the topic was, he'd have some like very exaggerated, probably not true story. And all of us, every time anything came up and he would start talking, we'd look at each other like, are you kidding me? You went to space? When did you go to space? You know, he would have these stories that you could hardly believe them. And I remember one day he's like, yeah, drug running has been really bad in British Columbia, and that's where he's from. And it's all about the Hells Angels. They're running the drug trade up there, and I'm really sick of it. I think I'm gonna take over the drug trade in British Columbia. I'm like, oh, are you? And I just kind of played along, and he's like, yeah, when we get back, I'm gonna rob a bank, and then I'm gonna take that money and I'm gonna go buy some weapons, and then I'm gonna start taking those guys out, and I'm gonna run the drugs. I'm like, wow, you've got some stories, buddy. And you know, he never did anything that was like off the wall. He was just kind of a quirky guy and would say weird things. Well, that should have been my first clue, right? But we get back from the deployment. We actually go on block leave, and getting ready to go on block leave. And I think it was the next deployment. But anyway, I was actually going up to meet the unicorn in Seattle. So I go up to Seattle and meet the unicorn on block leave. And we went on a date and all this kumbaya, right? Well, right after our date, I get a phone call. And it's my team leader, Brooks, where are you? I'm in Seattle. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure I'm in Seattle. Why? And he said, I'm just making sure, I'll call you back. And he hung up. Wow, that was really weird. Not a few minutes later, as he called me back, Brooks, you didn't rob a bank, did you? I'm like, what the? No, why would I rob a bank? He's like, oh, the FBI is going to be calling. Summer robbed a bank. And I'm like, what? Excuse me? And not 10 minutes later, am I on the phone with the FBI?
Wow.
And they're asking me, you know, what did you do when you left the barracks? You know, who did you talk to? Which route did you drive? How full was your gas tank? I was like, what? How full is I don't know. Like, they were asking me everything. And, you know, what are you wearing? You know, do you know anyone who drives this kind of car? And then some of the questions obviously were just trying to confuse me, and other questions they really wanted to know, like, do you know anyone who drives this car? Was a really important question. And it turned out to be an Audi. And one of the privates in Ranger Battalion had his parents' car, and it was an Audi. And apparently that was the getaway driver for a bank robbery that just occurred in Tacoma. And oh my gosh, the phone calls, the news, the FBI. I mean, everyone was calling me because in my squad, I had just come back from Ranger school. I was a specialist, and he was also a specialist that had just come back from Ranger school. So in our squad, we were the equal rank. We were the only ones that were tab spec 4s. And he robbed a bank in Tacoma with an AK-47, and he did it in a minute and a half and got like $60,000 or something like that. And then drove away in a getaway car with his buddy driving his parents' car with their license plates. And some little old lady called in this car who was acting funny at the bank. She didn't even know there was a bank robbery, but she called to the police because someone was acting funny at the bank and driving an Audi.
Wow.
And that was it. That was what took them down.
Damn.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah.
Like, I never thought I would be around. I mean, I basically was his roommate for a while that robbed a bank. It's just unbelievable to me. And it was definitely out of the wheelhouse. I'll tell you that.
You don't expect to hear that people are going to do dumb things, I think, when they come out of combat and training, but that seems to be like a leap. One of the guys I interviewed, Greg Coker, who was a former Little Bird 160th pilot, just like badass guy. He was saying before he joined the Army, he He's like, yeah, me and three guys, we thought we'd go rob a bank. We rob a train on horseback. And the local sheriff got some intel about it beforehand and stopped him. And he's like, we were going to go ahead and go through with that because that's what we wanted to do. And basically the judge said, all right, you want to go to jail or you want to go join the army? And they're like, we'll go join the army instead. Damn,
He
the
became a
things people
pilot.
did.
Wow.
And he did. Yeah, he was a badass. He flew Cobras, Apaches, and Little Birds. And he had a daytime, whatever goes wrong with 160th seems to happen in the day. So he had
Yes.
An auto rotation to the ground in daytime fighting in Iraq. So real cool guy. Anyway, so just as we wrap
Wow.
up here, full circle, the unicorn says yes. This is your wife today, right? Like full circle from the beginning.
It is.
That's cool.
Yep. Yeah, we're married with 2 kids now, 7 and 4. And I'll just say persistence pays off. Because eventually she said yes, she would go on a date. And
Right.
she claims to this day, I wish she was here so she could come in and tell you this, but she claims to this day that she always wanted to go on a date, but she goes, I technically was dating somebody and that's just not how she is. So she said she was happy that I kept asking.
Yeah. There's like some CIA tradecraft in there too. That's some of the stuff we would work on. So I like it. Hey, look, there's two questions I ask everybody. And for you, is there anything that you carried with you into combat that had sentimental value for you? Good luck charm, something that somebody gave you or that had a lot of meaning for you?
Yeah, I always had this little bracelet. It was a necklace with a emblem of Saint Anthony on it. And the reason I carried it is not because I'm overly religious, but my grandfather, who was in the Korean War in the Navy, when I went on my deployment, he grabbed my hand and placed it in my hand and said, take this. And so I took it and I would wrap it up and put it in my pocket under my body armor. And I carried it with me always. I still have it. Actually, right now it's on my rear view mirror on my car.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. And then the last thing I ask everybody, and knowing we haven't even talked Ramadi, and I'm sure you went through some pain there, but with everything that you went through, including, putting other soldiers in bags, and the exhaustion and the fighting and the sacrifice, would you go back and do all that again?
That's a very interesting question for the times, isn't it?
It is.
In hindsight, there are parts of me that want to say no. But at the same time, I know how much of a better human I am because of that experience. So I would never give it back. In fact, I think it's made me a stronger, better human. Like I was a child when I went off to war and I came back a full-grown man.
Yeah. And
I've always felt like I am basically 10 to 15 years older than I actually am. Like I relate with those people more. I think it's because I had to grow up so fast on the battlefield.
And you did bring up Afghanistan. I just want to take a moment here for whenever people listen to this. We are just in the early days of September. So the U.S. has just evacuated out of Afghanistan. There's a lot of emotion. I know a lot of people are reaching out to you. What is your kind of message to the vets who are dealing with this now?
Well, first of all, I can empathize with them because I was there, and I'm disappointed. I'm angry. I'm sad for the people of Afghanistan, for the children that, are never going to be able to taste freedom. So, obviously there's a lot of emotions there, but at the same time, I look at them all in the eye and tell them, you should be really proud. There are 20-year-old girls and boys right now that all they've known is freedom. And the only reason they know it is because you gave it to them. Like you risked your life for them to have 20 years to taste freedom because they may have never tasted it. And now that we're seeing Afghanistan fall, they're always going to have that little sliver of what freedom was. And we may see the Taliban fall shortly because because people have that hope and they're not going to want to give it away. And I think we're in to see some ugly things in Afghanistan, but at the same time, it should give us hope that, freedom and, our way of life is an amazing thing. And I'm hoping that the Afghan people don't just give it up. And I don't think they will. I think we're seeing it already in the Northern Alliance, that they're ready to fight.
Well said. So we'll have links to the book, but you can see it behind you, Leave No Man Behind. I strongly recommend people get their hands on this. It paints such a great picture of what it's like to be in that elite unit with these elite operators and doing a really difficult mission that plays out over several days and running up with PJs and SEALs and 160th. I mean, it's a really cool mix of what's going on at a really difficult time, especially now with what's going on in Afghanistan. So thanks so much for the time. It was a blast. Sorry I kept you so long, but I really appreciate it.
You know what? I love this, and you made it really easy. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this combat story. As we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you to those in the combat story community who have taken a few minutes out of your busy lives to not just listen to these stories, but also leave positive and supportive comments on Apple and YouTube. Here are some of the comments that caught my eye this week. This first comment comes from, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Amistokles. You should try to get Jason from Savage Actual on here, if he's comfortable with being interviewed. The dude is a certified badass. Completely agree. I had him on tap at one point. I need to circle back and make sure we can do that because I know he's got a silver star, which is not handed out easily. I know he's been through a lot. I would love to get that story on the podcast. So thanks for bringing it back up, and I will reach out to him. This second comment was left after the Ryan Hendrickson Part 2 interview. It's from Troy, and he says, Ryan, 2 suggestions. 1, some in-person interviews when possible would be a great future for the show. And 2, conduct a trade-off interview with another podcast or podcaster. We can get another great combat story interview and then see your side of the reciprocal podcast. Bottom line, more combat story. Thank you very much for saying that, Troy. I think you're right. I would love to get back to in-person interviews. It's a little bit harder to do, obviously, with COVID, but I think it adds a whole lot and allows us to spend just more time with the guest. As far as the trade-off interview, another great idea. If you have suggestions of who I should do that with, please send that to me. You can send it to my email, ryan@combatstory.com, or leave another comment. Thanks a lot, though. Stay safe, y'all.